Although they probably never knew it, Wilbur and Jessie were second cousins once removed. Both were related to Stephen Goodnow of Stony Creek, New York. Stephen was Wilbur's great-grandfather, and he was Jessie Bell's great-great-grandfather. Although his heart was in farming, gardening, and living off the land, Wilbur had to seek employment at the International Paper Company in Corinth in order to provide adequately for his family. He found the tour work exhausting because when he was home in daylight, he worked all the time, and he couldn't bear to work at night cooped up over a pulp machine, so he worked on the wood yard at 42 cents an hour for many years. He worked in the wood yard at the mill until he was too old. Then for years he cleaned up offices and recreation facilities until he was about 80 years old. Finally, the mill thought they couldn't justify keeping him employed, so they let him go and gave his job to 3 younger men. Very few men could or would work as hard as Wilbur did. During the years he worked at International Paper Company, he also worked on neighbors' yards and gardens and raised potatoes, etc., to get a little extra money to put into the family of 5 children and into the bank. In an interview with Wilbur Jr., I asked him to describe Wilbur's temperament. He said, "Dad was a serious and quiet man. The frustrations and agonies of the parentlessness and deprived youth cast a shadow over his adult life that burst out in spells of melancholy and despondency. This was a great burden to Mom and a great pain to Dad, but otherwise he was of good disposition and a good citizen and church member." Flossie says, "My father was less active religiously than Mom, but was very conscientious. Much of his seemingly indifference was due to timidity. The social side of his nature was undeveloped, probably due to the lack of opportunity as he was growing up." Flossie tells an insightful story about her father. "Dad was always very quiet around the house. I didn't realize that he could sing. One summer he was staying on with the Lee where he was helping Uncle Alex White do his haying. Dad would come home Saturday evening to the Gailey place for the weekend. During the raspberry season, Mother decided to surprise him by picking berries where she knew he would be coming through on his way home. In due time, we heard him coming through the woods singing loudly. He was about 45 years old then, and he lived to the ripe old age of 86. I asked Wilbur Jr. about the intellect of his parents. He said, "It's hard to describe the intellect of my parents. I think they both function pretty well in the essentials of life. They make the best of their situations that overtake them and make life worth living. They recognize their shortcomings and lack of opportunities, but they stick to their convictions and never give up. They didn't have all of the stimulation or opportunities of our day, but were able to cope with life as they saw it. And they survived in spite of the difficulties and made possible a better chance for our generations. And they kept the faith, and I believe made it to heaven. They must have been smarter than a lot of godless people who aren't wise unto salvation. Given the chance, Dad could probably do better with abstract theory, and Mom might be more practical. But I appreciate both. Maybe that's what Paul means by Dayton ingenuity, the ability to triumph over circumstances and do it anyway." Wilbur possessed several traits that have been handed down to several generations of Daytons. One is honesty.
Think about my father. If he had one characteristic that stood out above everything else, was his honesty. Well, I know from personal observation that honesty was one of his outstanding characteristics. But when Paul and I went in the sawmill, that first winter, it was rough. We had no money to start on at all, and we had no money to buy logs with. And I remember we were up around Palmer Lake, and we saw a logging job going on there, and we thought, boy, wish we could get a hold of those logs. Wish we could buy those logs. Well, it was just 2 or 3 days after that, I guess, that J. Smead came into the sawmill, and he said, well, talked to he says, we got a logging job going on up in here for Palmer Lake. Would you like to buy some fine logs? Well, I said, sure, we'd like to.
Yeah.
But we don't have any money to pay for them. And he said, well, have you got use for the logs? I said, well, yes. Well, he said, don't worry about the money. And well, we got to worry about the money. And he said, well, he says, I've known your father for a good many years. And he said, I'll get my money all right. Don't worry about that. If you want the logs, he says we'll bring them in.
Yeah, that speaks to his character.
And he says, you keep track of it. You'll pay for them. And that's the kind of a reputation he had.
Yeah. Even the Corinth priest, the Catholic Church, eulogized him when he was lying in state at the house, and talked about what a forthright, honest man he was and everything. This is what Wilber was telling me.
Well, he wouldn't cheat anyone out of it. Any money. Wouldn't matter whether it was 2 cents or if it was $25.
One thing I've observed in general is that I think that the Dayton men, and I hope they've passed it down, by the Dayton men I mean the sons of Wilber, have been very generous individuals. That's one of their characteristics, and I hope they've passed that down to our generations, and that stems from him also. Like we was a man about what, 5'8" maybe, or 5'6"?
Oh, at least 5'8". He wasn't fat.
He was slender, wasn't he?
He was all man. I mean, he wasn't, I wouldn't say slender, well, maybe so.
Was he Chip's build?
More like,
Matt?
more like Chip.
Yeah.
But he must have been all man. He must have been an awful man with an axe. Most of his work before he came to Corinth, well, some of it was on farms, but a lot of it was chopping wood.
Right.
I thought about that. Who would go in the woods to cut cordwood, which he did. I never saw Dad use a saw.
Mm-hmm.
That is a wood saw.
Mm-hmm.
Never did. Can you imagine chopping cordwood with an axe? No. He had several kids at that time doing that work. It must be up on Hadley Hill. And how do you do that with an axe?
Yeah.
I know I've heard him tell about him coming home at night, white ears, white throws and all that.
Yeah. Well, he learned at a very early age. He learned the meaning of work when both of his parents died, and he had to run the farm.
He learned to be a man.
Yeah.
The church played a large part in the life of Will and Jess. They were very faithful members of the Corinth Wesleyan Methodist Church. Wilber Jr. says, "The Corinth Wesleyan Church was about my only memory of home influence. For a while, Dad and I guess Mom felt less than fully satisfied with Corinth Wesleyan. But instead of forsaking it, they mostly added Hadley, 5 miles away. So I went to Sunday school, preaching service, and class meeting in the morning at Corinth. The same 3 on Sunday afternoon at Hadley, and back to Corinth for young people's prayer service, young people's meeting, and the evening preaching service. That was normally only 9 hours in travel time and altar services. But most of the time we were served only 6 or 7 hours at Corinth, except for special revival services. But on the whole, the church life was positive and helpful. I asked Paul if he had family altar when he was growing up."
Did you have family altar every day?
Oh, yes. Dad would read the Bible at night. And we all prayed. In the
So it
morning-
was a similar format to what we did growing up here.
In the morning, Mom read in the morning. And, I don't recall if we all prayed or not. But there was no question about whether we were going to have it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's a good habit. Have that while you have time for breakfast or not.
Chip talked about another aspect of family Christian education.
When we were little kids, we had what we called the Blue Bible, or the Blue Book, or the Blue Bible. It was a book of Bible stories. And Mother would, well, generally, like on Sunday afternoon, she'd read us stories from the Bible. And as kids, we knew so many of the stories, like David and Goliath,
Sure.
and Daniel and Lion's Den, and all those stories. We were familiar with all of those. I remember when I went to Houghton in freshman Bible, all of those stories kind of linking together, you know, and it helped a lot in the
Bible survey.
in the Bible class.
Yeah. The Dayton boys and also Flossie all were and are very fine Christian people. I can't, even though, you know, I'm part of the family, I really can't think of many other families that have raised such a supportive family of the Christian faith and so forth. That's a direct reflection, I think, on your parents and so forth. Can you tell me what you see is maybe to pass down to us as we raise our kids as to what your parents did to you know, instill the faith in you and to develop your Christian character and to make you such fine Christian people?
Well, I thought a lot along that line. I think a more general answer would be their example. Of course, that covers quite a lot of ground. But one thing about their example was consistency. They were always the same. Now, if Mother said, if you do this, you're going to get a licking. You go ahead and do it, you got a
I
licking.
got a licking. Yeah.
And she didn't.
She didn't sell. I'm not gonna tell you again, kids. Don't
No.
do it again.
No, there was,
Yeah, right, right.
no, there
Yep.
was none of that.
Yeah, you understood exactly
What-
where you were.
What she promised, she meant it,
Yeah,
and she carried through on her promises. That was one thing that was a big factor, and I think it's one thing that isn't held too much by so many parents.
I think you're right there.
They give orders, but they don't carry them out.
Yeah.
And I remember as a kid, I'd be in other kids' homes, and it was so different from our home. Kids come in, supper time, come in, grab something, and eat it. No, never asked a blessing.
Mhm.
And I remember even as a little kid, I used to wonder, don't they ever ask blessing?
Mhm.
And there's so many little things like that count, but they just, I don't know, they just don't seem important or something. Of course, in a non-Christian home, of course, they don't ask blessing anyway.
Mhm.
But
We'll cover the children of Wilber and Jessie separately in a few minutes. Paul, the 2-year-old in the center, helps us to date this photograph to about 1925. At the right in the front row is Wilber Jr. In the back row, left to right, is Chester, Charles, and Flossie. The family often got together for special occasions. Here in this picture, they are dedicating Paul Dayton's new home on West Mechanic Street. The photograph was taken about 1952. I asked Paul what Christmases were like at his parents' household.
Oh, sometimes Chop would be Santa Claus.
Mhm.
And one thing we always used to do is, in the afternoon, we'd all get around the old organ there in the parlor and sing. And one year the Methodist minister heard us singing, and he came and stood in the driveway. Yeah. He thought it was great what he heard.
Did you ever have anybody in, or was it just Wilber, Jessie, and the children, or?
Well, you think that's quite a household when you get
Oh, sure.
everybody that was married.
Sure,
their
Izzy
kids.
and Doris. And
We always had oyster soup back in
I remember
those
that
days,
when I was a
but-
kid, sure.
Yeah. But that one year, his Chop was coming over from Vermont. He was preaching over there then. He could smell the oyster soup. He got here and it turned out to be we had chicken.
Oh.
Wilber died July 18, 1957, at his home on Mechanic Street in Corinth, New York. He was buried in the Corinth Rural Cemetery in Corinth, New York. Now let's turn our